Hello, everyone. This is Jeff with Mississippi and the Civil War, coming to you with the first episode for the new year, 2023. And since it's a new year, I thought I would do something new. And I'm calling this little series The Record of Their Deeds, Mississippians Write About the Civil War. And I thought in this little mini-series, I would explore some of my favorite books from my personal library written by Mississippians about the war. And to start with, I picked one of my personal favorites. And it's one that if you haven't read it, you really, really need to. And the book I am going to be discussing today is A Mississippi Rebel in the Army of Northern Virginia, the Civil War Memoirs of Private David Holt, which was edited by Thomas D. Cockrell and Michael B. Ballard. And it was first published in 1995 by Louisiana State University Press. And this memoir is simply one of the finest accounts written after the war by a Mississippi soldier. And if you have not read it, I cannot recommend it highly enough. Holt was a very, very good writer. And there are not enough superlatives for this memoir. But to give you a little background, David Eldred Holt was born November 27th, 1843 in Woodville, Mississippi, the eighth of 10 children of Dr. David Holt and his wife Juliet. The family lived at Alphone, a plantation located about halfway between Woodville and Natchez. And they were a very prosperous upper-class family in Adams County, or not Adams County, Wilkinson County. And this memoir was written late in David Holt's life. He did it at the urging of his children, who wanted him to. He had often talked about his Civil War service, but his children really wanted him to write something down to save for the future generations. And fortunately, they were able to talk him into it. And in fact, to facilitate the project, Holt learned how to use a typewriter in his old age so that it would make recording the manuscript that much easier. So he spent several years learning how to type and then proceeded to type up his memoirs over the course of another several years. So it was a very long, ongoing project to record these memoirs, but thank goodness he did. So when the war started in 1861, David Holt wanted more than anything to join the military. One of his older brothers had served in the Mexican War, so he had grown up with tales of his older brother's service. And so when the Civil War started, he really wanted to join one of the local companies, the Wilkinson Rifles, that was being formed. But he was not yet 18 years old, and so he was turned down flat. And Holt wrote about this in his memoir. He said, Brother John had served in Mexico, so I determined to join the first company. Sheriff Johnny Hamilton was in charge of the recruiting station. I walked in there very businesslike and announced my intentions. Say, Johnny, I have concluded to join the Wilkinson Rifles. The hell you have, said Johnny. The room was filled with men. Johnny turned about in his chair, struck a match, and relit his cigar, and looked straight at me. Do you suppose we can carry along a wet nurse for your benefit? Have the boys sit up all night making you sugar teats, telling Mother Goose stories and singing nursery rhymes to get you to sleep? Get out of here. You damn little shirt-tail shaver, the diaper marks ain't off you yet. And this kind of humor is going to be par for the course in Holt's memoirs. He tells a very engaging tale. But it is a mark of how early the war it is that the Confederates would turn down any man for being a little bit underage, because soon enough, as they said, they were going to be robbing the cradle and the grave, just trying to get enough men into the ranks. But in early 1861, before the fighting started, they had the luxury of turning down young men who were not yet 18. So in the fall of 1861, Holt was finally given permission by his father to join the Wilkinson Rifles. And he said of his enlistment, I signed the roll and was measured for an outfit of the sweet gum dyed clothes. I rubbed up my old Mississippi rifle, polished its wonderful sword bayonet, greased and blackened my accoutrements, and felt it was impossible to be as large and important as I felt. I gathered what I thought I would need at the front: my gun and accoutrements, haversack, knapsack, a large overcoat with extra pockets, one extra set of underwear, 2 shirts, woolen socks, hat, cap, comforter, woolen gloves, knitted wristlets, handkerchiefs, and a large pocket knife. Besides these, I carried a knife and a fork, a tin plate, a full copy of the Bible, a copy of Shakespeare, a portfolio complete with pen and paper, a tool chest, 4 bottles of medicine, a mirror, a small boiler for coffee, and some tea and tablespoons. I absolutely toted all of that to Virginia. And this is Holt looking back on himself, because a lot of recruits did this. They just burdened themselves down with every possible comfort and convenience that they could think of, and only to find the first time they had to march that all of that weight was just going to kill them, and they ended up dumping most of it by the roadside. So this is just showing, what went through a soldier's mind at the very beginning of the war was going to change real quickly once the realities of soldier service hit. And for the picture here, this is from the Library of Congress collections. It's just a great early war photo of Silas A. Shirley, who served in Company H of the 16th Mississippi, which is the regiment that Holt belonged to. Holt probably would have had a very similar kind of uniform in 1861. So on arriving in Virginia, David Holt very quickly learned that being a soldier was hard work, particularly since the 16th Mississippi Infantry, to which he was assigned, was part of the command of General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson. And the 16th was the only Mississippi regiment that served under Stonewall Jackson's command during the entire Civil War. And David saw his first combat at the Battle of Front Royal, Virginia, a very small battle, which is May 23rd, 1862. And he said of it in his memoirs, "The regiment formed, and immediately we went down into the little bottom and up the wooden wall, coming in full view of the Yanks. We could easily trace their line of tents and small fire sticks both right and left. We saw their batteries on the hills beyond. We saw our own support on the right and left. On the right our line reached the enemy's. We opened fire as we ran. The enemy was taken by surprise. They were confused, but fell back firing at the same time. As I ran over one of their small fires, I picked up a hot frying pan which was still on the fire, threw the hardtack on it, placed my finger over the spout of the coffee pot, and carried the breakfast of that Yank for over a mile before I got a chance to eat a mouthful." So, any good Confederate soldier is going to grab a meal whenever they can, and that's exactly what Holt did. And he saw his next action at the Battle of Malvern Hill during the 7 Days Battles for Richmond, July 1st, 1862. And on making contact with the enemy, Holt was distressed to find that, quote, "our Mississippi rifle would not carry as far as the Yankees' Enfield rifle did. So orders were given to cease firing and fall back. We raced back, and the only reason we ran was because we could not fly. If we had not been spread out as thin as stepmother's butter on the edge of that ravine, few of us would have gotten back at all. The Yanks shelled us with all known species of artillery, from gunboat to 6-pounders, but did very little damage." Yeah, the 16th was fortunate. Their casualties were pretty light at Malvern Hill. That was basically an impregnable Union position, and the Confederates that were heavily engaged there suffered tremendously. Barksdale's Mississippi Brigade got shot to pieces at Malvern Hill. Fortunately, the 16th and their brigade was a little bit luckier. They did not get as heavily engaged and didn't have nearly the casualties that some of the other Mississippi units did. So in May of 1863, the 16th Mississippi was engaged near Catherine Furnace during the Battle of Chancellorsville, attacking an entrenched set of Federals that were behind some pretty strong works. And Holt wrote of this attack, "I squirmed my way through the abattis and rushed toward the regiment that had gotten there a little before the skirmish line and was fighting hand to hand with the Yanks in a bloody engagement. We came over the top with a big yell and joined in the fight. The Yanks thought that we were reinforcements coming in and broke. A big fellow named McBride carried our flag. He held the flagstaff with his left hand and clambered up the Yankee breastworks with his right hand. As he gained the top and straightened up, a charge of grape shot cut his hand off at the wrist and cut the flagpole off just above his hand. His mutilated hand and the butt of the flagstaff fell into the Yankee trench together. He jumped into the trench after them, picked up the butt of his flagstaff, and killed 2 Yanks with it. Then he fell. A tourniquet was put on his arm. I saw him after the war. So Holt didn't shy away from some of the more graphic scenes that he witnessed, and you'd see this throughout the memoir. He tells a very engaging and also very truthful account of what he saw. It doesn't pull a lot of punches about the blood and the gore. And the 16th was heavily engaged at Chancellorsville. They had 22 men killed, 57 wounded, and 25 captured. But they took the position that they were assigned to attack, and even gained the praise of their commanding general. So they were noticed for their conspicuous bravery on that occasion. And some of Holt's most interesting observations in the book are not about battles, but they're simply just ordinary interactions that he had with other soldiers and civilians. For example, this reminiscence from the memoir it was from the 16th march to Gettysburg, and he wrote, "We moved on having no idea of our objective. We walked by faith, though ready for work whenever something turned up in our line of business. We had the most serene confidence in Marse Bob. The natives seemed kind but curious. They had a notion that we were a lot of ignorant savages, particularly we from Mississippi. Their surprise was great when they found us courteous and gentlemanly, princes disguised in rags. Horde, who's another soldier, and myself walked a short distance from camp one evening after roll call and came to a cottage where a woman and her daughter were trying to get an unruly calf through a gate. We went to their assistance, and after a good, healthy chase, got the calf in and the gate shut. Then the mother asked us what state we were from. When we said Mississippi, she lifted up her hands and said, 'Oh, I thought all persons from that state wore fierce-looking beards and carried bowie knives. But you two look mild enough. Can't we give you something to eat for your trouble?' We lost no time in accepting the invitation." And in Holt's memoir, there is one battle account that really stands out above all the others, and that's the fight for the mule shoe at Spotsylvania on May 12, 1864. The 16th Mississippi was fighting in the heart of the mule shoe, which was some of the most deadly combat of the entire Civil War, the bloodiest and most sustained hand-to-hand action that just went on for hour after hour. And Holt's account of it is just riveting. The Federals had planned a mass attack on the mule shoe, which is a salient that jutted out from their main line. And they were able to, in a surprise attack, take the mule shoe, but a determined Confederate counterattack was able to reclaim it. But then they had to hold it against repeated Union assaults. And this is Holt's, excuse me, this is just part of Holt's account of what it was like having to hold that line against blow after blow from the Federals who were attacking at just point-blank range. And he said, "We were in the V-shaped salient that had traverses thrown up to prevent an enfilading fire. The line was soon mended, and we had to keep it mended. Soon the Yanks made a determined charge with fixed bayonets, but the mud fought for us as, quote, the stars were against Sisera and for Israel. The breastwork was in a bog, and to make a charge in such a place against a line of fierce men close up who have no idea of giving way was more than those gallant Yanks could do. Many of them were shot dead and sank down on the breastworks without pulling their feet out of the mud. Many others plunged forward when they were shot and fell headlong into the trench among us. Between charges, we cleared the trenches of dead and wounded and loaded all the guns we could get a hold of for the next charge. I was shooting 7 guns myself. We stacked them up against the breastwork with the butts in the trench, and when the Yanks came, we picked them up one by one and fired and set them down again. Many times we could not put the gun to our shoulder by reason of the closeness of the enemy, so we shot from the hip. At the time, a drizzling rain was falling. The blood shed by the dead and wounded in the trench mixed with the mud and water. It became more than shoe deep, and soon it was smeared all over our clothes. The powder smoke settled on us while the rain trickled down on our faces from the rims of our caps like buttermilk on the inside of a tumbler. As the day began to dawn, the firing ceased. I was very much exhausted and sat down on the front edge of the ditch with my feet unconsciously resting on the back of a dead man who lay face downward. Near me was a dead Yank, his feet stuck in the mud of the breastwork and his head in the ditch. Laying my head on his leg to keep my face out of the mud, I went to sleep in a moment. I stopped for a moment only, but in that moment I took in the whole ghastly scene. It was still drizzling rain, and a thin mist hung over everything. There lay the tree cut down by bullets, and the bloody ditch, and the many dead and wounded. One wounded man was cursing, another praying to the Blessed Virgin. Many were crying for water, some begging to have the dead taken off of them. I don't expect to go to hell, but if I do, I am sure that hell can't beat that terrible scene. Indeed, I am sure that hell on earth is a pledge for the hell after death. And in the fighting at the Mule Shoe, the 16th Mississippi had 36 men killed, 84 wounded, and 31 missing. And that's just an amazing account. And it goes on. It's actually much longer than that. I just excerpted a piece of it. But it's well worth your time to read if you have any interest in the fighting at Spotsylvania. This is just a fine account. So in August of 1864, Holt was captured during an attack along the Weldon Railroad near Petersburg, and he and his fellow prisoners from the 16th were sent to Point Lookout, Maryland, prisoner of war camp. And he recorded his impressions of the camp in his memoir, and he said, when he arrived, "Here was a real down, sure enough Yankee prison, and we looked about with great interest. A wall of 2-inch plank, 12 feet long, and set 2 feet into the ground, enclosed a space of 9 acres. About 2.5 feet below the top of the walk, and on the outside a narrow platform extended around the whole prison. And on this platform, at intervals of a few feet, a Negro guard was stationed with his gun loaded and rested on top of the wall and trained on the prisoners. And between the streets, there was a double row of all sorts of tents and shacks in which the prisoners lived, or rather existed. I was inducted into a Sibley tent on 6th Street with 4 of my company. There were other prisoners already in that tent. We swelled the occupants to about 16, some crowd for such a small tent. I was given a bunk made out of the tops of cracker boxes and about 2 feet wide. As the weather was warm, I doubled my blanket under me to soften the cracker box tops. I had no cover and never pulled off my clothes except when I went swimming or washed my shirt. Underwear I did not possess. We answered roll call every morning and every evening. The remainder of the time we roamed around hunting for something to do or see. And I can imagine just being stuck in a prisoner of war camp. Probably one of the worst things was just the utter boredom, the sameness of day after day, nothing much to do. It would have been difficult under the best of circumstances. And David Holt was exchanged in November of 1864, but by the time he had recovered his health after his time in prison, the war was basically over. So he went on home to Woodville and for many years made his living as a druggist. In 1889, he heard the call of the ministry and became an Episcopal minister. And he moved around a good bit during this time. He stayed in Mississippi for a while, but he went out to California for a short time, and then went and moved to Florida, where he would live the rest of his life. And one of the interesting things I found about Holt was that in the early 1900s, he actually had a one-man show based on some of his wartime experiences during the Battle of the Wilderness. And one newspaper article about the show stated, quote, "This evening Reverend D.E. Holt will lecture in the Opera House. His subject will be One Day in the Battle of the Wilderness with the Confederate Army under General Lee. He will be assisted by Mr. J. Taylor, banjoist." Boy, I would love to be a fly on the wall and listen to that program. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any more detailed descriptions of what the program consisted of, but given how good a writer he was, I imagine seeing him in person up there on the stage talking about his wartime experiences must have been quite an interesting event, and I really wish I could have been there to see it. But Holt lived a long life. He died on November 5th, 1925, and is buried in Evergreen Cemetery in Jacksonville, Florida. And hopefully this little brief synopsis of the book will encourage you to buy your own copy. It's still in print. Here's my personal copy right here. And I will tell you, there are actually two editions of this book. This is the first edition, which is white with a red lettering on the cover. There is a second edition, and I would recommend getting the second edition, which has a blue cover, because between the printings, they actually found some additional writings by Holt that were not included in the first edition. And so the second edition is actually about 15 or 20 pages longer and has additional content. So if you buy a copy, buy the second edition, which I think was published in 2001. The first edition was published in 1995, but it's readily available. You can pick up a copy in paperback, so it's very affordable. And I hope you liked this little episode. I plan on doing more on some of my other favorite books related to Mississippi and the Civil War. If you like it, please give it a like and a thumbs up. Leave a comment if you have any questions. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do, because it really helps me to gauge, how much content I should try and put out. And I'm hoping to put out a good bit this year for 2023. And thank you again for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.